Every edition of the Magpie Circle is a special one. But today we have a guest who is truly, truly unique. I'll explain why in a moment, but a very warm welcome to Shaun Derry. Great to have you on board, Shaun.
Brilliant to be here, Paul. Yeah, good to see you.
Right. You're unique because I don't know of anybody else that was born in Nottingham, grew up as a Notts County fan, played for the club, managed the club. What about that, eh? For a boy who went to Ellis Guildford School from Baseford.
What a journey, eh? What a fantastic journey that was. No, I mean, I feel very proud and privileged to be that person. Like you say, there's not too many football players, managers who have had the, the feelings that I've had over that short term of nearly 18 months of managing the football club on the back of playing for the club that I supported as a boy. Unbelievable. I mean, whatever happens again in the future, whether I become a manager again or whether or not I stay in the game as long as I want to, that will never be taken away from me. It's a very proud moment.
Okay, we'll delve into your journey. This podcast has already generated more interest, I think, than just about any other. So I'm just going to say a thank you to all the various people that have sent in questions, and we'll get through them as we go along. But a shout out to, let's go through the list. Ian Priestley, Robert Huckabee, who claims your dad played for Colton Athletic. Is that correct?
He did. He did. Won as many local teams. Yeah, my dad, goalkeeper John.
Steve Orton, Tom Webb, Rob Astle, Ian McLaughlin, Richard Lane, Richard Sharp, Bob Shepherd, Simon Staples, Ashley Story, Asher Levin, Callum Frankton Lees, Pythagoras, Smikey, Colin Sisson, Paul Smith, Tom the Magpie Gunner, Jim Smart, Stephen Orton, Joshua Barnes, Rob Davis, Joe Warren, Kyle Motson, James Spring and Darren Wrigley. So, guys, thank you very much. Your questions will be dropped in throughout all of this. Shaun, you grew up a Notts County fan. I suspect that's because of your dad. It invariably is. It is with me. Talk about those young years growing up. And were you in the junior Magpies as well?
Yeah, I was, yeah. So I suppose you do. You obviously follow your dad, don't you? My dad was an avid Notts County fan. A goalkeeper in his own right as well, was a good non-league goalkeeper. And his boyhood team was Notts County, and I followed suit. I've got two brothers, Rob and Simon. Simon's a Notts County fan, Rob's a Forest fan, so there was a split family there in terms of, what results we were looking out for over the, over the Saturday afternoons. But yeah, my dad used to take me down to Meadow Lane since, I think I was about 6 years old when I first went down with my dad. I can't remember the game, obviously, but he said that I had a spinning top that I never ever stopped playing with on the in the stands. I didn't watch a minute of the game, but obviously I was hooked afterwards.
I can't remember my first game, to be honest. But what was that era? What was that generation of players that, as a young lad, you were going to watch?
Well, I suppose when it got really serious, it was round about, I suppose when I was about 10 years old, I joined the junior Magpies. I was scouted for Notts County in or around my 10th birthday. I played my first game for Notts on my 10th birthday. And then from there, the club were kind enough to give the junior Magpies tickets to go and watch on a Saturday afternoon. So I used to take my dad, my dad used to take me down, and it was round about the era of, the Mark Drapers, the Tommy Johnsons and, Gary Lund and, that kind of era where it got quite exciting.
Hey, very exciting. It's been a challenge since, if I'm honest with you. So what would so you went to Ellis Guildford Com. What would your primary school have been?
Yeah, it was Old Baseford Primary. Sadly not there at the minute. I'm not too sure what it is, but yeah, it was Old Baseford born and bred, all the way through, and kind of just stayed there all the way until I was, actually stayed at home until I was 20. So even when I went all the way through the ranks at Notts County and signed my YTS forms at 16, was still living in Old Basford, and whilst the player as an 18-year-old until 20, still lived at home with my mum and dad in Old Basford. And even when I signed at Sheffield United, still lived in the family home. So, yeah, Basford born and bred.
Basford born and bred, Nottingham born and bred, plenty of time down at Meadow Lane. What was it like going through? Were you able to play for school teams? I think you played for Nottingham boys, didn't you, through the various age groups?
Yeah, I mean, football was just everything, wasn't it? As a kid, I used to play for my school on a Wednesday. I played for the district or Nottingham boys on a Saturday morning. Then I played for Basford United on a Saturday afternoon, and then Notts County on a Sunday morning. So, you know, my dad was a taxi driver taking me everywhere I wanted to go, and full of support from my parents. And just like many, many, many other kids have got that support network. It was phenomenal, really. The amount of games and training. Used to train on a Monday night behind Meadow Lane in kind of like this enclosed rubber. I don't want to call it a venue because it wasn't. Because every time it rained, it would be a waterlogged rubber pitch. But it was this little kind of hut behind Meadow Lane, and it was some great memories. Mondays and Thursdays, and then playing on a Sunday morning for Notts County.
Dean Yates and his generation, which would have been a little bit before you, always used to call that the cow shed. And in their day, Jimmy Cyril would still be teaching them little skills and all, you know, obviously you'd have just missed out on Jimmy. But yeah, a lot of the Whiteys, they all talk with very fond affection in that sort of formative years on what is that big car park now, where there was like, used to be a five-a-side courts and things like that. And it used to be covered and whatever, and then gradually fell into disrepair.
That's it. I mean, that was it. That was where, I mean, we go on about these wonderful training venues now, but, you know, for me, for 6 years, every Monday and Thursday, it was a five-a-side court. And the only time we played on a big pitch for Notts County was on a Sunday morning. So in terms of, you know, all the little technical skills that we're able to formulate, it was all enclosed on this rubber surface, which was, I mean, it'd be struck off now, wouldn't it? You know, you would never get that through an academy now. So brilliant for me. You know, it gave me a fantastic grounding of being a young footballer, Notts County did.
Who would have been going through with you in those years? Any other players that went on to make the grade with you, or were you kind of an exception at the time?
No, I mean, I started as a 10-year-old, but I was playing in a year above. So in my group at the early stage was James Hunt and Robert Cosluck, both of them boys. I mean, Jay's still my best mate now. You know, he was my best man at my wedding, and I was best man at his wedding all the way. We met at 10 years, you know, when we were both 10. So they're the kind of friendships that football, you know, fantastically bring your way.
So you're doing your schoolwork, you're playing for Nottingham boys, you're playing for Notts. You got into the first team very, very early. Were you only was it 16 when you got your debut?
No, it wasn't actually. It was slightly older. I was 18, but I was a second year YTS at the time.
Right.
The reason I got in there was funny, really, because the year before, when I was 17, Colin Murphy and Steve Thompson were the managers, and we played a pre-season game away, and I played on the left wing. The most unskillful left winger Notts County probably ever seen. But
we've had a few dodgy ones in recent years. Don't worry about that.
And I had such a poor game that Colin Murphy actually said to me I could leave the football club. I was only in my, I think it was my first year YTS, and I was obviously devastated, you know, to hear them kind of that noise coming out of Colin's mouth was everything that you didn't want to hear as a 17-year-old. And it really kind of struck a chord with me, and, you know, I got my head down and made sure, you know, worked trebly hard. And what happened was, it was just a fate, really. And many league debuts are made by, you know, just strange, weird and wonderful situations that take place. We'd signed Chris Wilder, and Chrissy was struggling with his ankle at the time, and I was asked to play right back in a just a in-house 11v11 kind of a 30-minute training game. And I remember playing this ball from right back, and I kind of played a lofted pass over the back four into I think it was Tony Battersby, and Bats has controlled it and put it in the bottom corner. And Colin, you know, the way that Colin was, he'd go, "Oh, you know, that was a clever pass, Shaun. Can you do that again?" So I got it out of my foot, and I went, and it dropped straight on Bats's foot, and he went, "That's got you in the squad for Saturday." Well, the squad was travelling to Blackpool, and we were in a hotel beforehand, and I know I'd gone as the 19th, not the 19th man, probably the 14th, 15th man, I'm sure, in them days. And I knew I was not going to get involved, but it was just brilliant to be there. And we was in this hotel next to the sea at Blackpool. And Colin said to me, "Shaun, can you turn off that television cleverly? Because the lads are watching this game, I think. Grandstand was on or something like that." So I just went straight over to the main plug and turned it off by the main plug. And he went, "Oh!" Rubbed his hands the way that Colin does. He went, clever boy, that Shaun." And I stayed in the squad, right, ever since. Then that was kind of my integration into the first team. I don't know whether it was turning the television off cleverly or passing the 40-yard pass into Baxter's feet, but Colin was just like, you know, the greatest character I think I've ever met in football. And because he warmed to me and he trusted me, I think, that's why I probably made my debut. And I think the debut came on the Tuesday night, I think it was against York. I think it was against York City at home. 2-2. Yeah, York at home. And he, about an hour and 15 minutes before kick-off, he just said, "Listen, you're going to play. You might want to give your dad a call." And my dad quickly got in his Ford Escort and got himself down to Meadow Lane and watched me play.
That must have been a very proud moment for your dad, given his own footballing background, and watching you come through the ranks at Notts. Yeah, I mean, what was it like for you to play that game?
I mean, as a player, you know, I was very focused anyway. But if you can picture the scene, you know, a stadium that's probably only a fifth full, so you can hear every single voice, can't you, at Meadow Lane? And I could hear one particular voice, definitely in the second half, sat upstairs in the Derek Pavis stand, and it was my dad, and giving me a little bit of everything, a bit of encouragement, a bit of his frustration at times, and that was one early memory of my debut. Was not just playing for the first team, but having my dad in the stands watching me play, and him being the fan and the dad must have been a strange moment for my old man.
You established yourself and you started playing games quite regularly. And in the 3 seasons you were at the club, there was something always happening, wasn't there? Because the first one you ended up in the playoffs at Wembley, the second one relegated bottom, and the third one the club won a championship. So you experienced, I think it's fair to say, highs and lows at Notts from a very, very early time. What was that season, the first season, when you ended up playing at Wembley against Bradford? Was that beyond your wildest expectations or not?
I was 18, you know, wet between the ears to a certain degree, and I was the right back, and if you can remember, just in front of me was Steve Finnan as a right midfielder. And at the time, Steve was living with us in my mum and dad's house. He'd come from, he stayed with us. He was only supposed to stay the weekend. He stayed 6 months, Steve did. And we couldn't get him out. But so me and Steve, you know, we forged a fantastic friendship that's still to this day, you know, it's still very close now. And, you know, I remember losing the game to Bradford and being on the bus afterwards and looking around and seeing, you know, a lot of disappointed faces, of course. And it was weird because as an 18 and a 19-year-old, we just looked and had a little conversation as if we'd see these times again, you know, as if that we'd playing these big games again. And it was just a feeling that me and Steve had. And it definitely wasn't arrogant. It wasn't, you know, we're not arrogant people. We're not, but we were confident in our abilities that we would, although it was a disappointing day for Notts County and for us as teammates of the team, we knew that we thought we could get to these levels again. And I was gutted, obviously, as a Notts player and as a Notts fan that we didn't get into the championship. But I had more disappointments throughout my career after that.
I remember the game well because I was at Leicester City at the time, and we had it was the League Cup final the following day against Middlesbrough. So we were all staying at Burnham Beeches, which is kind of where England used to stay. And so I managed to get special dispensation from Martin O'Neill to hop in a car, taxi, whatever it was, go to Wembley, watch the game, and then come back. And what are your memories of Wembley? I mean, an 18-year-old walking out at the old Wembley. I mean, what were the key memories of that? I mean, how disappointing must it have been to lose, or was it just a whirlwind for you as an 18-year-old putting on the old Not shirt in the Twin Towers?
Well, I mean, I've never watched the game since. I've never been able to find the footage of the player final. So, I mean, if anyone's actually got that, it'd be lovely to view it one day. But playing in the game and seeing the surroundings of Wembley Stadium, we use the expression, don't we? It's a boyhood dream, and it really was. I mean, I've been there on a couple of occasions as a Notts fan, going to the playoff finals and seeing us having them back-to-back victories, taking us into the old First Division it seems like only 5 minutes ago. So to pull on the shirt to play at Wembley and to be on that hallowed turf, and it really was a hallowed turf. It was, the one real memory of it was it was spongy. Wembley was bouncy and spongy, and it was like no other pitch I'd ever played on. And it got to about 70 minutes, and I was fatigued, and I was leggy, and it just got a little bit too much, I think, for us as players, and we just didn't turn up. We didn't play well, and Bradford did, and they went on to obviously get into the Championship. Well, whatever the level was at the time, I forget what the levels are, but it was just a tough day, wasn't it?
Lovely story about Steve Finnan a moment ago. Just tell me a bit more about Steve, because it's one of those great quiz questions, isn't it, where he's kind of won everything in every division, every cup, up to the European Cup. Who is it? It's Steve Finnan. And yeah. I think, was it Colin Murphy that spotted him? And I think he got Vinnie Harkins at some point as well and brought him over. So that must have been quite a cultural shock. And Steve's been quite an introverted guy down the years at Liverpool, hasn't he? He's not done many interviews and that sort of thing. So your family, how did he end up in your folks' house? Was it like, stick your hand up if you can put him up for a week and save the club a few quid or something?
Well, we'd spent £300,000 on Steve and didn't put him in a hotel, which was bizarre, kind of like Steve's scratching around. I've just signed for Notts County and, probably one of the most important players that we had at the time. And he was scratching around for some digs. And I think he went to visit Graham Hogg's house and didn't fancy it. I can understand why, I can understand why he didn't want to go and live with Hoggy. So I just went home and I said, look, Mum, would you be able to put Steve up for a couple of nights? And it was only, honestly, it was supposed to be for the weekend. And I think he stayed for 6 months for the day that he arrived. We just got on, we clicked. He liked the fact that it was, we were young guys. I don't think he fancied doing his washing or his ironing or his cooking. So, my mum just loved it. She absolutely adores Steve. And, the family got pretty close together at the time, and I think from Steve's perspective, I think he liked the fact that he still had some sort of family that was looking after him. It helped him with his game.
Brilliant story. Didn't know any of that. Great, and that's kind of what all these podcasts are all about. So the fans think, oh crikey, hey, did you ever think you'd be a European Cup winner?
Amazingly. I mean, we shared holidays together over his career. And, when he went over to Fulham and was outstanding at Fulham, and then he had a chance to go to Manchester United. He spoke to Man United and spoke to Alex Ferguson and decided to go for Liverpool. And I think you speak to any Liverpool player and they recognise him as, one of the best right-backs that pulled on the red shirt. And I mean, of course, he was so disappointed with the fact that he came off at half-time against AC Milan. But to have that Champions League winners' medal somewhere in one of his houses, I'm guessing, would be a great moment.
So, first full season, you've had a trip to Wembley. Second season, clearly a bit of a nightmare. and then the bounce back, if you like, with Sam Allardyce. What was all that like as a learning curve for you?
It was. I mean, from the highs of Wembley to the lows of getting relegated. Actually, if I can remember rightly, I think it was my own goal that got us relegated on the day. I think it was. I think it was. Yeah, it was at a near post. I flicked it over and it went into the top corner, and it took us down, which was devastating. So so obviously, fast forward, Sam arrives, and the whirlwind of Sam Allardyce as he was. I remember the big long Ford Scorpio car that arrived in the car park, and he had this massive mustache, and I thought, this is a guy we're not going to mess around with, and we didn't. But within it, he was very structured and organised and creative. Sam was incredibly creative in the way that he spoke to the players, and the information he gave us to go out onto a football pitch and be the best team in the league by a country mile. We had goal threats all over the pitch. We had good young players, saleable assets at the time as well, and we were a team really going for, we grabbed hold of that championship with both hands. And although I was delighted to go and move to the championship with Sheffield United, I was also more than slightly disappointed that I didn't get to see the season out and have that full season as championship winners.
What were the characters like in that group of players? Because there were some strong men in there, weren't there?
Oh wow! I mean, none more so than the captain. You look at Gary Strodder as the leader of the group, of the changing room, as the men. He was that talisman that everybody went to. And then in and around it, you had youngsters like myself and Steve, and Matt Redmar was in and around the group at the time, and good players like Ian Barraclough and Ian Richardson. And then you've got at the top of the tree where the goal threat of a Gary Martindale, and it was just good team. Very, very good team. Great to work with them every day. The one thing that I can remember from Big Sam's time there was that togetherness was the most important part of the group. We'd always, do you know what? We always used to go to a pub on a Wednesday afternoon, and he'd always say, listen, everybody goes, whether you're a drinker or you don't, and you stay there from 2 till 4 o'clock. Well, no one really knew what 4 o'clock looked like, because it was 4 o'clock on a Thursday morning. We were still kind of in and around them pubs of West Bridgford. But, and I know, listen, people would say now, well, that's not the right way, but rewind 20 years ago, that was the way of getting people together. And on a Thursday, we would train incredibly hard, and then we'd be right up for it for a Saturday and just win games week after week. And Sam was brilliant at being a brilliant manager, but it was also brilliant at being a people person, and his skill set was to really get people together, which formulated a great squad for us.
Which boozers did you used to go in then?
We go down the bottom. There's a little one tucked away down the bottom of West Bridgford, just round the back. It was just off the beaten track, and there was a little room at the back where we'd go in. So all the locals didn't see us, thankfully. Not that there was these horrible things back in the day. But we just used to go there right in the back. I forget what it was called actually. It was just this spit and sawdust old pub in the bottom of West Bridgford. It was brilliant.
Great camaraderie and great team spirit. I mean, I think that went through the whole club, didn't it? Because, we spoke just before we started this podcast that you travelled up, because Derek Pavis was obviously the chairman, the archetypal chairman, fedora, big cigar, all of that. And you actually made, for his funeral at St Mary's Church, the big church, you came up from London, didn't you, to attend the funeral?
Yeah, I mean, Derek, was the chairman. If you could just categorise a chairman, it would be Derek Pavis. How I know football, from my upbringing, and so even now, I look at chairman and owners now, and I look at Derek Pavis, and I just think he was the man, wasn't he? He was spiky. Half the players hated him, half the players loved him. There was always excitement in or around his office. You knew when he was in the corridor. You could hear these steps in the corridors of Meadow Lane, and you just knew he was about. And thankfully, he liked me, and that helps, doesn't it? You know, it helps when the chairman likes one of the young players. And actually, it was him who told me that I'd been sold to Sheffield United. It was a Sunday morning. We played Lincoln on the Saturday, 1-5-3 at Sinsel Bank. And on the Sunday morning, I'd gone out with my mates on a Saturday night, as I always did. And a Sunday morning, house phone rang, and it was my mum answered it, and she said, "You better speak to this guy on the phone. It's your chairman." I was like, "What? It's the chairman."
What you've been up to on the Saturday night, yeah?
Yeah. Luckily, what's happened to the CCTV coverage? What we've been up to, you know? And but no, he just said, "Listen, it's been great, Shaun, but we've accepted a bid for you, and you're off to Sheffield United." And I said, "Have I got?"
You had no say in this, by the way.
Well, I asked the question. I said, "Have I got a say in it, Chairman?" He went, "Absolutely not." He said, well, "Make sure you're not back at Notts County on Monday morning." I never came back. I went to Sheffield.
So you got the call from Derek. What happened next then? Presumably, do you have to go up to Sheffield?
Yeah. So I was dressed within half an hour, and I had to meet. I had an agent at the time, and I went to meet Sheffield United, and the deal was done within about 3 minutes. Steve Thompson was there. He was one of the young. He was in the room when I was talking, and it was Steve Thompson who basically took me to Sheffield United. Nigel Spackman was the manager, but it was Steve really who instigated the move for me, which was fantastic because he obviously worked alongside Colin the year before.
What are the thought processes for a supporter's perspective here that go through a professional footballer who is a Notts County fan, only played for Notts County, only been associated with the club he supported as a boy, went to Wembley with them, that you're leaving? How do you counterbalance? You're a professional, this is your career, you know, home is where the heart is, Meadow Lane, all the rest of it.
Yeah, I think it was formulated through the conversations that I'd had perhaps over the recent year. You know, I was linked with different types of clubs over the past year before leaving for Sheffield United. And obviously you have conversations with different players in and around the dressing room about this potentially could happen and what's your thoughts on this. And I always used to lean towards the senior figures. So, you know, I talked to Gary Strodder about these rumours that were taking place, and I would talk to him about what his career looked like, you know, and he being at West Ham and at West Brom, and then obviously ended his career in the lower leagues, and kind of understanding what it felt like to be actually have a career as a footballer. And I needed to ask them questions, so I got myself ready mentally to leave the club. And I knew at the time when I did get that phone call, I know I was ready. I knew I was ready for this big shift into the Championship. You know, the levels increased, the expectations increased because of the size of the football club, and obviously, you know, my performances needed to improve as well, because I needed to try and get my shirt as a young Championship player.
Now, there's a certain irony that am I right in saying that Neil Warnock became your manager at Sheffield United, and he showed you the door, correct?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. So he'd arrived. Yeah, I mean, it was Neil Warnock was the manager who I went to see week in, week out. You know, at 91, 92 when he was manager at Notts, and he arrived. We had an abundance of midfielders, some good young players. We had probably 4 or 5 at Sheffield United, all under the age of 25, and the club needed to sell. The club had hit, I wouldn't say it hit the skids, but Neil wanted to try and, you know, organise his group for him. And he just said to me, do you know what happened one day? I was supposed to go to Man City when Man City was in the 3rd tier with Joe Royle. They put a bid in for me, and Neil said I wasn't available. And then we played Grimsby about 2 weeks later. And I foolishly questioned one of his decisions after the game. And he sold me the next morning to Portsmouth for half the money. For half the money that it turned down from Man City, probably only 3 or 4 weeks earlier. and Paul Devlin was at Sheffield United, and Dev rang me on the Monday afternoon, and he said, the gaffer's got us all on the pitch, and he said, if any of you guys want to question one of my decisions again, I'll F you off down the country as far as I can. Look where Derry is. He's down in Portsmouth. So that's how I left Sheffield United. Gaffer getting rid of me.
But that's very, very interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, Alex Ferguson always says, you know, one of the major pieces of advice he ever gives to his former players is they're either with you or against you. And if they're questioning your authority, there's only one boss. There's only
100%.
one boss.
Yeah, 100%. As a manager now, you know, if that had been a young player saying that to me, you know, my actions would probably be the same as Neil's, really. You know, you'd look to, unless he was an absolute superstar, which I wasn't, you know, you'd get rid of them, wouldn't you? And you wouldn't have that, because you don't want to be questioned as a manager in the way that I questioned Neil that day, and he was 100% right. I was a little bit lippy as a 20-year-old, and paid the price. But what I would say is the move took me away from Nottingham, and it took me down to the south coast, where I actually grew up as a player. And when you look back, you know, on the situation, it was a blessing in disguise, really, because I went and found my feet and looked after myself as a young man. So
all the time at Sheffield United, you would have still been in the family home, getting your mum's cooking, getting in the car, up and down the M1, yeah?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was exactly right. And, you know, you become accustomed to that, and you think that's right, don't you? You know, as a kid, and I was a kid. I was 22 years, 22, I think, when I left Sheffield United, and went down to Portsmouth, and in the big wide world on my own, Tony Pulis signed me, and I had to look out for number one, and that was me.
I tell you what, your managers, you didn't half play for some very, very successful managers, and by successful managers, I suppose it's obvious, but managers who basically set their stall out to win. Yeah. You win. Yeah. Sam wins games. Neil wins games. Tony Pulis wins games. That's what they do, isn't it?
Yeah. And I was looking back at the list of managers that I did play under, and they all do come under the category of manager. And I think there's a very stark difference between a head coach and a manager in the modern game. I really do. And I believe, my own opinion is that, you know, a lot of my traits as the manager of Notts County, when I first came back as the manager, were from my working and early memories working alongside them great managers.
It's very seamlessly done, that. You'd almost think I knew what I was doing with that link. So you have clocked up best part of 600 games, whatever it is. Top two divisions, you played in the top flight. So then a vacancy arises at Notts County as your playing career is kind of twilight, whatever you want to call it. Now, the story goes, you rang Notts up. Talk us through what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the back end of my career, 35. We'd been relegated out of the Premier League for QPR, and the group of players that we had at the time were hugely assembled financially. Incredible group of players. But within it, you know, we had some major flaws in and around that dressing room, and I'd had enough. You know, I'd had enough of them type of characters, and I wanted to leave and went to Millwall on loan, and I had 2 months at Millwall. And you know what? I played better in the Premier League than I did in the Championship. I think it was because, you know, the pressure, the lines of pressure in the Premier League don't really impact a holding midfielder like me. Whereas the Championship, you know, it was a real forceful league when I was 35, and I just felt that I wasn't really giving everything that Millwall needed at the time. But it was a local club to where I live, and you know, it really worked for us as a family. And then obviously the call came, and it was a friend of mine. He rang me, and I was on a coaching course on a Sunday. I played for Millwall on the Saturday against Burnley, drew 2-2. my wife and children had gone to Portugal that night for a week away. So I was on my own for the week. I went on a coaching course somewhere in Wembley, I think it was. And my phone rang. And it was a pal of mine saying that Notts had sacked Chris Kawamia. And I was on a coaching course. And honestly, this is how it went. And we were talking about an interview process. I was learning, I was learning my A license.
Yeah.
And the discussion that morning was about, can you find an opportunity to have an interview while you're still young? There's a lot of young coaches there. No one was working in a first team environment. And honestly, I left. I went to the toilet and I rang Jim Rodwell. I'd got his number because I played in kind of a charity game about 3 or 4 months earlier. And
I remember it. Yeah, 150th anniversary, probably, wasn't it?
Right. It was our anniversary game, and I went there and I played in the game, and I had a real brief conversation with Jim. And Jim happens to be a friend of my best friend, James Hunt.
Right.
So I didn't know Jim from Adam. I just met him on this game. Anyway, I called him and I said, Jim, it's Shaun Derry. And he laughed. I said, what do you want? I said, I want an interview. I said, I think, I think I can get the team going again. And he started laughing. I said, look, I probably will look to you guys as the wild card, but at least give me the time to meet you. So I met them in Stamford on the A1. I met Jim. Firstly, I met Jim. And then Aileen True and Ray True came along about an hour later.
Yeah.
And we had a good hour, and then we had another good 3 hours. And at the end of the 4 hours, I got in the car and I thought, I have a chance here. I actually have a chance of becoming the Notts County manager. And I just got unbelievably excited. And nothing had been even discussed from a boardroom level until the next night. Jim rang me and asked me to go back to Nottingham on the Thursday. And obviously, I kind of thinking then, this is such an important conversation that I'm going to have. And after about an hour, we invited Greg Abbott down, and Greg came, which Jim said, listen, we want to offer you the job. And it was just like spine tingling. It really was. It was just an unbelievable moment for me. And my wife and children are still in Portugal at this time. So I'd not told them about this interview on the Tuesday. I just waited because I just needed to focus on what I was doing. Obviously, cut a long story short, Thursday night, I'm the Notts County manager, and it's all over the local news. And I've rang Jolene, my wife, and said, listen, babe, when you get back, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be up in Nottingham.
She goes, great, you're not going to be here anymore.
Yeah, she was buzzing. Kids were devastated. And I was the Notts manager. And it was just an unbelievable week. A phone call that wanted just an opportunity for a conversation. 48 hours later, and I'm the Notts manager, which was great.
So it's fair to say that, as you've just said, the whole process is less than 7 days. You are now Notts County manager. You're the manager for the first time.
Yeah.
Is that a difficult transition? Because in my time, I've seen it quite difficult for players to finish playing and transition to be a manager.
Yeah. I think if you was to ask me if I was to be the Notts County manager now at close to 43 years old, I would make some different decisions. I would definitely look back on what the last 8 years has given me in terms of the experience that I've now got. And I would potentially be a different type of manager to the manager that I was when I was back in 35. Because you're right, I was a player 1 week and I'm expected to lead the club the next. And I wanted that. Look, yeah. I knew that I hadn't been a coach. I'd not supported somebody. I'd not managed an under-18s or 23s. I knew that. But it felt comfortable. And I felt confident that I could do the job. And I leaned on Greg a lot for them first 6 months because he had been the manager of a League One football club in Carlisle.
Was Greg your choice to be your assistant, or the club suggested it would be Greg?
No, it was my choice. I knew that I couldn't do that on my own. I knew that I couldn't just go in and expect to know everything about management, because I didn't. I knew 5% of what management looked like because I was a player. But I had a firm belief of what I wanted to go and instill up in Meadow Lane. And I believe to a certain degree that I did it.
You said 43, you'd be a different manager to the type of manager you were when you went in at Notts. So what type of manager were you when you went in at Notts?
I was a very emotional manager. I was very obviously results driven. We have to be, don't we?
Yeah.
Whether you're speaking to me or you're speaking to any other manager, everything's all about results. And at that moment in time, we weren't getting many good ones. So it took time. And what I had to do was transform a dressing room that probably had a coalition of 4 or 5 different managers, players in there. And that was really difficult.
Okay.
Managing a group of players that actually all had different desires and needs and actually agendas towards the football club was difficult to a degree. And after 3 or 4 games, and those that can remember rightly, I think it took us about 4 or 5 games to get a win. So after 3 or 4 games, I just went, right, I put a group of players in one camp, and we ran with another group of players. And it was these group of players that I asked them the question: you either want to jump on board in this camp, or you have to go and play in this little group down here, because that little group down there don't actually want to be at the club. And I didn't want anybody who didn't want to be at Notts County. I just wanted the lads who really wanted to be here. And it was after 3 or 4 games where I cut it, and I had a cull, and it worked. And we started to trust each other.
So how difficult was that decision to make? I mean, I guess that group that's over here, they're often called the bomb squad these days, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And listen, respectfully, hopefully, if you was to speak to any of them players now, they would say that I treated them with respect and with politeness. But I couldn't focus on that group, because this was what I was being judged on. And this was what every Notts fan wanted to see successful again. So that was difficult for them players. And I get it. I understand. I've not quite been in that group at any point in my career, but I know what that group looks like, and it's a difficult place to be. But this was an important place. We had to really get it right. And we had some tough results early on in my managerial career there.
You said earlier you were an emotional manager. How did you transition from being the midfield general who can influence the game directly to being sat in the dugout and you're trying to pass on your thoughts? Because although you do kick a ball in the dugout, you can't kick the ball, can you? I mean, was that difficult? I mean, some managers I've met judge their players by their own standards, and sometimes it's the wrong thing to do, because they maybe weren't as good as the manager was, and there's a reason they're here and they're there. I mean, man management presumably and managing personalities was a big part of it for you.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, I focused on that side of things, really. Man management, talking to the players, really formulating clear guidelines of what I wanted them to do. There was parts of the management day-to-day discussions in terms of like the boardroom discussions where I handed them to a degree over to Greg, because I couldn't really focus on that. I needed to focus on the players. And the emotional aspect of it, I am an emotional guy, that's what I am as a character anyway. And I didn't want to take that away from us, because I felt that was a skill set of mine, which was a strength. But I also know that I'm quite a demanding character, and a lot of my demands, some of the guys couldn't do, and I think the balance of me being, listen, I could still play. I mean, I could have played for Notts County at 35, But I decided not to, because what I'd done at certain moments of the week, I would go on and I would step into training, and the levels would improve because I could still play. And then once they improved, and they improved collectively, and then if I dropped out, at times it would drop again. And that's where I could really step in then and say, well, listen, you've just had a 20-minute part where we've lifted it, and the intensities have lifted and rose, and you can do this. You know, I was giving them a lot of confidence in the way that they could lift their performances just by stepping in and out of training at certain times of the week. But I never wanted to be a player manager. I didn't want that. I wanted to manage the football club. I wanted to be judged on the manager. And at times, I remember getting a kit ready once where we were just slightly low on players one weekend. And I said to Pilks, Pilks, get me a kit. I think I might have to play in this one. And I'm glad I didn't, because I'd have been rubbish.
Yeah. Hey, 20 years ago, there were some player managers around. You don't see any now, do you? And there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that.
Your focus is solely on the job. My job was to manage the football club. And I think, you know, and that was another thing. Managing the club, I was given the responsibility of actually managing the football club, which is bizarre, because as a 35-year-old with no managerial experiences, I was dealing with things that I've never encountered before. I'd heard about them in the dressing room as a player, but I'd never encountered them. So that was exciting. That was it. I was excited by the job. It excited me every single day, going in and learning my craft, having had no experience before.
2 players you got, and it's quite staggering now where you look where these guys are. So you have got, in this ragtag group of players that have been assembled by 3 or 4 different managers, you have one Jack Grealish, one Callum McGregor. Callum McGregor, captain of Scotland, Celtic. We all know about Jack at Aston Villa. What did you see in those 2 players when you walked into the club?
I saw 2 lads that were very different personalities. Jack was this happy-go-lucky, just young, impressionable genius in certain aspects of his game. And then I looked at Callum and I saw similar traits in terms of his ability. There were different types of players, but I saw a very, very focused young man who was intent on being the best possible player that he could be. And this is where the dilemma came for me, because I had this young 17-year-old on the left wing who could win us any single game that he decided to win us with, which was Jack Grealish. And I had this other left-sided player who loved to pop up in little pockets, but wanted things into his feet so he could turn and kind of, you know, really have his 1v1 duels from a deeper position. But then I had Ronan Murray, who wanted to run in behind and run off the back of a number 9, which was obviously, you know, we think back to the pitch we had as well, Paul. We had a pitch that had no grass on it.
Yeah.
I remember one Friday night, I'd never seen the Evans Open like it. I was in an apartment at the side of the Trent where me and Greg were living, and the heavens opened. And I knew that we had a rugby game on it that night, but we also had a home game the next morning. And I turned up about 12 o'clock and I looked at the pitch and I nearly cried, because the pitch was decimated because of this downpour. And you know, like when you're trying to pick a team and you're trying to pick players that suit a system, sometimes you have to make some big calls. And a lot of my big calls were levelled around Callum McGregor, because he actually didn't play too often for too long in too many games for me in that second part of the season. Yet he was probably up there with the 2 best players that we had.
That season will be, I guess, forever remembered. The Great Escape. The Great Escape. You know, there's that great poster that was done and all of that with you at the front. Oh, brilliant. So with 9 games to go, it looked bleak. Now, I read somewhere, did Ray say to you, like, we almost need to start planning for next season or something? I'm not quite sure exactly when he said it, but I think you took umbrage with that, didn't you?
I did, yeah, because I was a player that played for teams that played all the way until the 95th minute when that last ball was kicked. And football has a weird and wonderful way of creating some unbelievable stories. And I felt I was still in. I felt at that time, with 9 games to go, we'd lost away at Tranmere 3-2, and the phone rang that night, Saturday night, and it was Ray, and he said, "Listen, Shaun, here's your budget for next year for League Two." And I was on the phone. I went, "League Two? What are you on about?" He said, "Look, I'm a realist. You know, we're going to get relegated. It's not your fault. It's an accumulation of everything." And I said, "I don't want to listen to it." I said, I'd actually appreciate it, Chairman, if we didn't have any sorts of conversation about anything to do with budgets until we know what league we're going to be in. I firmly believe that we're going to stay up. In fact, I know we're going to stay up. I just know we're going to stay up." And he didn't mock me. Ray didn't mock me at all. He wasn't that kind of guy. But he went quiet, and I knew that he didn't believe it. And that really hurt me, because I wanted everybody to jump with me, you know, and really jump on board. And I could sense at that moment, with 9 games to go, and we were in that bottom parts of the league, where I could even sense sometimes a few of the fans didn't really believe it, and I did. I really believed it, and at times I'm trying to cajole everybody into this one way of thought, and obviously the last 9 games just was incredible. It was beyond incredible.